Utah Politics.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Congressman Chris Stewart here to discuss the latest issues playing out in the nation's capital and a big bill he plans on introducing this week when you head back to Washington. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, good to be
Appreciate
with you.
it.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
Let's get right into this. Banning children from social media.
Yeah.
First, before we get into the bill, we'll kind of break down what exactly it will do. Let's talk about the need.
Yeah, oh my gosh. Thank you for letting us talk about it. This is the first opportunity we've been able to do this in the media. And to set the table for this, consider a couple things. A national survey, a broad national survey with tens of thousands of people answering between ages 14 and 24, school-age kids, 42% of them have been diagnosed with anxiety or depression. And here's the frightening one. 31% of them have considered suicide and talked about how they would commit suicide with a friend. We have never had a generation of such anxious, depressed, or vulnerable children. Never had anything like this. But the thing is, Glenn, you can look and pinpoint the moment when this began to change. And it was actually in 2012 when Facebook bought Instagram and they started advertising and marketing to 9, 10, and 11, and 12-year-old girls, and then the same age group of young men, and brought them into social media. And it's left us with this. This is a stunning thing to consider. Your average 13-year-old in our country spends 9 hours a day on social media. The average 8-year-old spends more than 5. And the outcomes for them, the emotional and the mental challenges and the mental destruction that takes place, we just have to protect our children from this.
Yeah, children these days are connected to their phone because they're afraid they're going to miss out on something.
Yeah.
Or, they see that picture and they are missing out on something, and that all contributes to that. But there's also a social element to this and how it has impacted children. Did that play into this at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all of that plays into it. I mean, everything from, let's talk about China, who spent literally billions of dollars to create TikTok, which is nothing but emotional heroin. But they did that directed at young teenagers. It's not directed towards people like you and I. It's directed towards young teenagers. And so as they become acclimated to this, and at 9 hours a day, once again, there's just unquestionable that it has a direct tie to the anxiety, to the depression, and to the suicide that we're seeing among our youth.
You talk about not people like you and I, but there are adults that fall into that trap as well. I mean, I spend way more time on social media than I would like to, and I don't even like it.
Yeah. Well, there's no question that that's true. But you know what? If you're our age and you choose to spend your time on social media, that's different than a media company actually targeting a 9-year-old or a 12-year-old. And particularly young women. I mean, this thing is destructive for young women. I'm talking young teenagers and their emotional health, for their own sense of worth, their own sense of kind of where am I in the world. Everything that they look at is number one, artificial. It's not real. And everything they look at is designed to make them feel like you don't add up. You're not as good. You're not as beautiful. You're not as active. You don't have the same group of friends. And one last thing on this, Glenn, to your point about, well, adults being on it versus children. If you're a parent who has said to one of your children, look, we're not going to give you a smartphone. We're not going to allow you to be on a screen for 9 hours a day. Good thing for that parent to do, but very difficult, because you've isolated your child.
Right.
Socially, you've isolated your child, and that's what we're hoping to accomplish here, is if all 14-year-olds are prohibited from being on social media, it makes it a lot easier for those parents and families who choose for their children not to be and not to have that isolation there.
Those are hard conversations to have and decisions to make, like when is the appropriate time. Okay, so your bill would prohibit platforms from allowing any child under the age of 16. So 15 and under.
Yep.
How did you come on that number?
Well, part of it is based on studies of emotional development and where the child is in their emotional development. Part of it is a political decision of what age could we actually get support for. You might make an argument, maybe it should be 18. Maybe 14, but those become very different political challenges. And 16 seemed to be the appropriate age It's when we start to trust our youth. We allow them to drive. We allow them to take on other responsibilities that we don't allow 14-year-olds. So it's kind of a combination of things is where we settled on the age 16.
And how do you hold those platforms responsible for that? Like how, will there be age verification requirements? Talk about that.
That is the key to this, isn't it? Because actually right now, it's technically illegal for a 13-year-old to be on social media. But of course they all are, and there's two reasons. Number one is...
Right, you just use a different birth date.
That's right, and there's no verification at all. And there's not been any social or kind of societal pushback on allowing a 19-year-old on social media. So this would create that, and it actually makes the social media companies responsible for verifying the age of the person who's signing up for a new account. Well, people say, well, they can't do that. Social media companies say to us, well, we can't do that. Well, of course you can. Number one is they know everything about every one of us anyway. They know how old this person is. Now, they won't admit that, but they do know. But let's put that aside. There's other ways to verify their age, the same way we do on a lot of things. A driver's license, a birth certificate, they would actually have to document their age. But the key to it is this. Right now, there's no penalty for them disregarding this law. And this would create a legal remedy for states or for families. If there was a negative outcome, a suicide, for example, that it would allow them a legal recourse for social media not enforcing the law once this law is implemented.
And what might that recourse be, though? How would they be held accountable?
Well, I think there's a number of things. You could see class action lawsuits. You could see people who were suing because of the costs of mental health that they may have to provide for. I mean, you could see states doing class action against it. I think there's a number of legal remedies that would be effective.
This bill will also take some action on protecting the integrity of our information, which is really at the basis of the business.
Yeah.
How will that work?
Well, and it's an extension of what currently exists, but it actually, once again, isn't enforced, and it makes them take the privacy issue so much more seriously than they do now. There are elements to that, and they're not unimportant. I'm glad that we're including that. But the key to this comes back to this one thing. Enforcement of the age, verification of the age, and a legal class action or legal standing if they don't enforce the age requirement.
This obviously isn't going to go over well with big tech companies. So how are you prepared to take that on?
You just kind of put on your helmet and prepare to get beat over the head because they don't like this. I mean, we've had initial conversations with them. And of course they don't like that, because if they can bring someone in and socialize them, to no pun intended, but socialize them into using social media when they're 9, 10, 11, and 12, they'll have them for life. And so they, of course, want to keep this pipeline. They're going to fight us on it. But, you know, the interesting thing is President Biden wrote an editorial for the Wall Street Journal last week arguing essentially for this. We have Democratic sponsors who will join us in this bill. We really believe this is something, it's a little bit like the 988 number that we created, the National Suicide Hotline number. This is something that shouldn't be terribly partisan. Many Democrats are worried about our society, they're worried about their families, and they feel the same way that you and I do, or at least that I do on this.
So have you had conversations with the president on this? And his staff, and they have signaled potential support?
That's right. We have had conversations with IHS, and they have signaled support.
Okay. What about your Republican colleagues? What are they saying?
Well, most of them are supportive, but not all of them. I mean, some of them, for different reasons, they worry, for example, about, well, how do you actually enforce it? Some of them, you know, in a libertarian bit of a streak, say, look, I don't want the government telling me or how to manage social media with my children, which I understand that. I mean, I don't either. But there's this reality as well. We set up government standards and government safeguards for kids with drinking, with the age we allow them to drive. They can't smoke or vape. I mean, for heaven's sakes, if you have a swimming pool in your backyard, the government can require you to put a fence around it to protect children. So there's clearly the precedent for government to establish certain rules, certain guardrails that would protect children. And so for those who are a little bit more pushback with the government intervening one more time, I'd say, you know, this is perfectly consistent with other safeguards to protect young people.
This is something we will be following. Make sure to keep us posted. Very interesting bill, and I know there's a lot of discussion on a state level of how to address this as well. Appreciate your time. Thanks so much. You bet. So to come, opening week of the general legislation.